Hello, everyone. Welcome to Laser Focus. This is the Deep Dive Pop Culture Podcast from Nerdist. I'm Kyle Anderson. Thank you for listening. We are in October, which means it is time for spooky things. All 5 episodes that will come out in the month of October are about spookiness, and I'm very excited to discuss all of that with our various guests that we have. Starting out the month, we have past and future guest, friend of the show, returning champion, whatever you want to call her, Ty Gooden, my cohort in crime. That's not what people say. My partner in crime. Why
Partner
couldn't I
in
think of the
crime.
word partner? Cohort came to me so fast. Anyway, who cares? Hi, Ty. How are you?
Hey, Kyle. I'm glad to be back. And I think it's
Yeah,
really cool that we're recording on October the 1st. So we're like kicking off
we are.
October, Nerdoween, as we call it here at Nerdist, on the right foot.
Absolutely. So yeah, this is a fresh episode. Folks listening on the Thursday when it drops, it's only a couple days ago, but yeah, we wanted to start off with something. So the last time Ty was on, which was only a few weeks ago, if you're
Mhm.
listening in real time, we talked about Animorphs and how much that, like Scholastic book club was really important to us and stuff like that, but also kind of the weird stuff Nickelodeon was doing in the 90s. And that kind of led to us talking about shows like the one we're going to talk about in depth today, which is a favorite of both of ours. I think it's a very formative show for me, and I imagine it is for you in that kids getting introduced to horror at an early age safely, I think, is a really important thing for just
Mhm.
kind of the I don't think sheltering children from anything scary is smart or good at all. But if there's Scooby-Doo was popular for a reason because it's like safe
Yeah.
spookiness. And so yeah, we're going to talk about the Canadian made but Nickelodeon aired here in the United States series Are You Afraid of the Dark, specifically the first 5 seasons, which ran from 1992 to 96 in the US. Hugely influential show on me.
Yes.
It ended okay, so for those of you who are younger than us, Snick was this thing that they started doing on Saturday nights. I mean, Saturday Night Nickelodeon, because back then it was Nickelodeon during the day, and then the second the sun even thought about going down, it turned to Nick at Night, which was all just reruns of old like Americana shows.
Yeah.
And then on Saturdays they started having a 2-hour block of Nickelodeon programming at night. So for me in Colorado, it started at 6 and it went to 8. And it was stuff like Clarissa Explains It All. And initially, there was a show called Roundhouse, which didn't last very long. It was like a sketch comedy show
Yeah.
with music. And then I'm trying to remember what the third was. May have been Ren and Stimpy or something like that initially. I guess I could look it up. But then it always ended with Are You Afraid of the Dark? Because that was like the latest, ergo would be the darkest. And
Yeah.
yeah. It's an anthology horror show basically where kids sit around a campfire and tell scary stories that ostensibly they made up themselves, but like as a grown-up going back and watching some of these, it's like there's no way that kid came up with a story.
Yes. All of you could have been the next like R.L. Stein or someone like
Seriously.
that if you're able to come up with those kind of things offhand. I think it's um I think it's probably a combination of just things that they saw around them, but then
Sure.
also urban legends and stuff, like kind of twisting
Oh
those
yeah.
tales around a bit. Because you could definitely see that in a couple of like they'll have some stories revolved around a lot of them were like paranormal type
Yeah.
things, but then they would also have like, werewolves and things like that. And of course there are a zillion urban legends or whatever. It's really similar to what I used to do as a kid. Like because I was into Are You Afraid of the Dark? I had a group of cousins and we were all around the same age. And we would usually stay at we had the one like cool aunt that you would always go and stay at her house on on the weekend and stuff. And so on Friday nights, that's what we would do. We would get together and tell ghost stories and make up, our stories were nowhere near as good as these that are on this show. We tried our best. We were very young. But like that was kind of what we did. We built off of like, scary stories to tell in the dark and
Oh
like
yeah.
different like books and stuff like that. And you would kind of make your own little spin on things you had already seen before. So that's probably what they were doing, but they did a very good job of it. Like it definitely was one of the formative shows for me. And, we talked about it before, kind of a bunch of different media and how it really built up our experience as horror fans. So just like I was into Animorphs and I was into Goosebumps and, Fear Street and all of those things, like Are You Afraid of the Dark? Even though I was very young when that show came out, it definitely was something that I was watching and into. Like Saturday night staple, because you're young, you're not old enough to like go out and, at least I wasn't old enough to go out and like party or do any of the
Mm.
things that the cool kids were doing, but I was into reading books and I love stories and I liked audio dramas and stuff. And so it really fit in with the style of like storytelling and things that I was into. And also the Midnight Society just seemed really cool. Like
Yeah.
I wanted to be a
I
part of like a eclectic group of people to meet in the woods and tell strange stories and throw dust on campfires and things like
yeah, to make it kind of
yes, to make it like flare up and then the title card would pop up and it's always the tale of XYZ, fill in the blank there. Ah, I love it. Just hearing
yeah.
the theme song like gives me like good feels and joy.
Me too. It's an interesting one. So like everything about it was meant to kind of give kids the creeps even right away. So like the opening is just a series of like kind of weird canted angle shots of just spooky things like doors
Mhm.
rattling and like a clown puppet and like empty swings swinging and stuff like that. And I think
Yeah.
that like it set the mood so perfectly. Um and then like the door would open and there would be the title and there was the hand with the
Yeah, the
match
hand
and
with the
everything.
match. Mhm.
It's so yeah, it's so funny. It's seared into my brain and like it was always I remember it being like spooky, but I don't ever remember being like terrified by anything on that. But I don't really, if and I think I'm pretty sure I watched almost all of it like as it went out on Snick and obviously in reruns they would rerun it forever. But like so it originally aired August 15th, 92. So that I would have been 8 years old.
Yeah.
And then it ended on um April 20th, 1996, which was right after I turned uh or right when I was about to turn 12. So like that is your formative years
That is
when
the
you're a
formative
kid.
years.
Yeah,
Yeah,
when you're a
absolutely.
kid.
Yeah, and
Like
like you said, it help you get into horror in a way that wasn't necessarily scaring the pants off of you and making you wanna go the opposite way from the genre. Like, it was enough to
yeah.
kind of get your feet wet and make you want to discover more, and there's I mean, the reason that people like horror and they're invested in it and into it, part of it is that whole, idea of being scared and kind of like the thrill of something jumping around the corner or something like that or whatever. So it played into that, but just enough that it wasn't going to terrify a kid and make you like afraid to fall asleep that night, or it wasn't as hardcore violence or any of those things like that. And
Mhm.
there were also a lot of moral lessons there because I mean it
Yeah,
is a show for kids, so a lot of
right.
the stories kind of revolved around like being a person of your word and what happens when you break
Mm,
your word, and that maybe revenge isn't always the best answer, and that you need to be honest with people about things. So they would kind of weave in, and it wasn't like hitting you over the head with those lessons, but they would just
mhm.
weave it into the storyline as most kids shows would do. But you would also get that supernatural element, the creepy element, and you had like that grounding force of the Midnight Society there or whatever that reminded you of like kids you probably went to school with, or you like saw yourself a little bit in some of those kids too.
Yeah, and I always liked that there was some degree of, especially as the show went on, like storyline continuity in just the wraparound segments. Like
Yeah.
they obviously were a very small part of the actual runtime of the episodes, and yet you'd get this sort of like there was romances between some of the characters, or like these guys didn't really like this guy, and
Yeah.
like it was the fact that like they all got together to tell stories. That's the thing that like united them all. They weren't necessarily all like friends in real life, and I think that's a really interesting. I was constantly trying to come up with clubs and stuff. So like when I read the Encyclopedia Brown books when I was a kid, I wanted to have a detective agency, which obviously
Sure.
didn't last very long. And then when I wanted to do my own version of the Midnight Society, but here's the thing, almost instantly when there I had like 3 or 4 classmates who at lunch we would like, all right, here we go, we're going to tell scary stories, and obviously in the middle of the day is not very scary, but like we are not talented as adult TV writers were, and so like it was very quick. I was like, oh, these
Yes.
aren't good stories. Or like somebody would just literally just read something from Scary Stories to tell in the dark, and I was like, this doesn't quite work
Yeah.
for me.
Same.
I was constantly coming up with clubs and then not carrying on with them for very long. But I really wanted to have like a clubhouse with, you know, the stuff like you read. That was such a big part of like media when we were kids. Books and
Mhm.
TV shows was like a specific group of kids getting together to do a thing. Like,
Right.
and
Yeah, and like you
man,
said, they didn't have to be best friends. There are probably people that in life outside of that sphere, that space or whatever, probably didn't really talk to each other or didn't really know each other that much at all or whatever, but they would get together because they all like united under that one thing. It's kind of like it's an early introduction to like how fandom functions. Because a lot of times fandom will bring you together with, other people who may be different in, many, many other ways, but you have this one thing that like unites this group of people that are coming together and they want to celebrate and do it. So
mhm.
it's like that with Doctor Who. Like, I mean, so many of my friends and stuff that I've made through the fandom, I mean, they couldn't be any more different from me in all other ways of life. But because we have this connection over this one lovely sci-fi show that we love, like we'll get
Yeah.
together at a convention and we could talk about that all day and all night. And we literally do that for like 4 days for 4 days in a row. And then everybody goes back to their lives of like doing the other things that they were already doing before.
Yeah, I the different walks of life thing is so important. Like, and it's obviously you and I have the same job, like we work at the same place, but also like you and I have done the same thing.
Yeah.
So, but it's rare for like, I won't say rare, but like of the people that we met or I have met anyway, just from Doctor Who conventions, only a small handful of them are actually like other media, journalists.
Yeah.
Um, because everybody else is sort of just like, like accountants or they work for the school board or like whatever. Like it's just like you said, it's all just coming together for this specific thing. Um, I've never gone to a horror convention though. I feel like I'm like, I don't know. There's like a specific level of people who go to horror conventions. Maybe that's a very
Yeah.
gross generalization, but I have
No,
never gone.
I've never been to one too. I've always been interested. There's one that happens every year. I'm in South Carolina, and there's one that happens maybe about 2.5 hours north of me, up in North Carolina in Raleigh. And I've always been interested in going, but I don't know what's held me back. I don't necessarily think that it's a place that I wouldn't belong, but it's something about something with that, and it's the same thing with, like, anime conventions, which I have been to before, but they're so wide, like, broad stroke. It's different than going to a Doctor Who convention because it is this
Mhm.
one specific show, specific thing, whereas with horror, I mean, it's like over 100 years of a genre, and people are into slashers or they're into, thrillers or they're into all these different like subgenres within it or whatever. So I'm like, I don't know that I would be able to find my place and like find my people in that space.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, it would have to be something specific. Like if there were like a Scream convention or something like that, because I'm a big fan of the Scream franchise, that I could go to, and I would operate the same way that I do at a Doctor Who convention, because like I've seen all the movies a zillion times. I have like random bits of knowledge about this show that a normal person should not have. Like I've watched, especially the first three movies, I've watched them like in probably an unhealthy amount of times. So I could be on a panel. I could do all of those things like that. Like I don't, and not saying that you have to be like an expert on anything to be a fan of it, of course. Like that's not something I subscribe to, but you definitely feel more comfortable in a space the
Mhm.
more like the more intimacy you have with a certain thing. So it's not that I don't love horror or anything, but I'm just like it's so widespread, and some of the things that I do like are kind of like off the beaten path and like indie
Yeah.
horror and all of that stuff like that. So I'm like, it just doesn't feel like it may not be the right space for me.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. I feel like I'd much rather talk to you about horror than
Yeah.
just and see what, because you never know. Like you said, it's sort of widespread. It's not all just, although, and that is, we're getting very far afield of Are You Afraid of the Dark, but um, like there are definitely people who like Doctor Who, for example. That's the thing that unites. That's one of the many things that unites you and I. But who like it for different reasons than us. And we're
Yeah,
like,
sure.
I don't really hang out with those people. But like, yeah, I agree with you. Like I'd need some sort of in to go
Yeah.
with. And they have them all the time. Like horror conventions are very common. Like there's Monster Palooza or something like that. Either it just happened or it's about to just happen here in Burbank. And it's like
Yeah, you guys have a Scream Fest?
Sure.
Is that the name of it? I think so. There's some screaming convention happening out in LA in
Screaming
October.
convention.
It has the word "scream" in it. I don't know. I think it's Scream Fest though, but it seems very long. It was like I got emails about it, and I'm like, this is like 10 days long. Like that seems
Yeah,
like a lot to consume in 10 days. But if I happen to be out there, I wouldn't mind going to one. Like, I'm really curious about how they work, and a lot of times they do have stars there that I wouldn't mind meeting from, popular films and stuff. You may see, like Heather Langenkamp or, somebody like
sure.
that, and you recognize those people from, like, classic iconic properties, and it's probably your best chance of getting a chance to, like, meet them and interact with them, and if they mean a lot to you, tell them how you feel and all of that stuff, but I don't know. Maybe I'll work up the nerve one day. In the meantime, I might have to start my own Midnight Society, though.
Yeah. You may as
Yeah.
well. Why
I
not?
got the I got the people that'll be dedicated to it, and I feel like I'm a slightly better storyteller/writer than
Sure.
I was at age 8.
I would hope so. I mean, that's not to say that like little kids can't be good writers, but like if you, an adult professional writer, aren't as good as you were when you were 8, then I would think that
Then
that's
it's a problem.
then there's a problem. Um, this also kind of put me in mind weirdly of like, do you remember the and maybe we've talked about this before, but the way AMC used to do Monster Fest every Halloween for like a decade or more,
Yes.
where there would just be like back when AMC just showed movies before they kind of got into the making their own TV show stuff. But oh yeah, we did
Mhm.
talk about this when we talked about The Walking Dead or something like that. I don't
Yeah,
know
we
if
did,
this
we
was
did.
I don't know if this was on Wax or if it was just you and I talking, um but yeah. So anyway, well, I won't go into that because that was a whole different thing, and maybe another episode, a different year of Nerdoween. Okay, so let's get into Are You Afraid of the Dark? Like I said, it was a Canadian TV show. There's there were a lot of young child actors, or kind of preteen, even into teen actors who at the time maybe you didn't recognize, but like went on to stuff, and I think that's super fun. Some
Yeah,
of them more famous than others, and some of them were even famous at the time. I think the most famous one now, obviously, is I think he did 2 episodes, but Ryan Gosling was
Ryan
in two
Gosling.
episodes,
Yeah.
um, which is sort of like people often forget that he's Canadian. He was also in the Mickey Mouse Club, so like he did a bunch of stuff. Um, he was a kid. He was a kid actor. um, but I think one of the things that unites kind of all the stories for the most part, because actually, like the more you watch it, you kind of figure out that like whoever is telling the story, they have a specific type of story that they tell, or like
Right.
themes, and not just like two of the storytellers have recurring characters who show up a few times, which I'm sure we'll talk about when we get into our lists. But like there are, depending on the person telling the story, like you can kind of figure out, okay, this one will be supernatural, this one will be kind of um uh more romantic, I guess it was a thing. There's quite a few like romantic ghost ones. um and some of them are great, and some of them you're like, all right, I've seen this one a bunch of times. But I do feel like they used ghosts a lot, and ghosts maybe are the easiest ones to kind of depict. You just draw like black circles under somebody's eyes and light it a
Right.
specific
That
way.
was pretty much it. Like, they would just look like the Walking Dead.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah. But then I was sort of, you were saying that like it's sort of a safe, and nothing was like too scary, and there were often like lessons and stuff like that. There are a few episodes that end on like a twist, and a twist, I mean like a swerve sort of, um where like the kids don't get away with it, or like it's
Yeah.
implied that they die at the end, and it's sort of like, oh wow, that's dark for a kid show.
It is, but I mean, again, it's like you said, I mean, you can't really shy kids away from, like, bad things and horror and
Sure.
stuff like that. You also can't shy them away from the fact that death happens, and even though this is kinda,
Right.
like, encapsulated in this supernatural, fantasy storytelling and stuff like that, like, it's something that kids definitely have to be able to process and understand, even though they didn't get into like a bunch of the permanency of it, because again, it's anthology, so you're kind of moving from one story to the next each week or whatever, but it's a soft introduction to, like, sometimes bad things happen and people don't always come out, there's not always a happy ending,
Hmm.
for every situation, and that's an important lesson too, but also, I mean, just entertaining entertaining to watch. And I mean, and even now looking back at some of those things, I'm like, wow, like, I can't believe you made those choices at the end of the episode. Because I mean, most fairy tales and things like that, you do get a happy ending for, for most people. But
Right.
yeah, they went a little dark a couple of times. But what you said about the characters and like it tying into when you saw a certain character get ready to tell a story, like that's so true. So like my favorite one of the characters was Kiki.
Mm,
So she was they were a relatively diverse like group of kids or
sure.
whatever. And so she was, I guess they kind of like painted her as tomboyish. Maybe I didn't see it so much then, but now I kind of read her more as just a person who is possibly queer.
Yeah,
And they
yeah,
just
yeah.
really, early 90s, they're not really going to straight up express that, on television, especially for kids that age and with kids watching or whatever, because that's just how people were back then.
Mhm.
But either way, like, I mean, you knew that, like, I knew that most of her stories would have something to do with like, they were very like hard on like lessons and like, you know, learning how to treat people and all of those things. But they also always had people of color in them.
Yeah, it's,
Yeah, which made sense because
yeah.
when I would make up stories and tell, again, you're looking at things from your own experience. And when I would make up and tell stories as a kid, when I would picture the characters in my mind, I always pictured them for the most part as people of color, which wasn't always my experience when I was watching things on
Mm.
TV or, reading books or looking at the, covers of the books and looking at what the characters look like and everything like that. But I looking at it now as an adult, like it's so funny. And I'm like, yeah, like when I would watch it as a kid, I definitely related to Kiki a lot. And I'm like, she's kind of like me, like a little rough around the edges, pretty outspoken, always like into some kind of like, story or book or something like that. I love how she always there was the other kid, Stig, who was an outsider, like even among
Mhm.
outsiders, and he had like a a bit of a crush on her. She was just always like, get out of my face. Like
Yeah. And also, like, she was clearly much older. Like, he was meant to be like,
right,
so that was in the, like, later episodes where, like, a few of the kids left in between seasons.
right.
One of which, Rachel Blanchard,
Sometimes
went
with
on to
no
be on,
explanation.
yeah,
Yeah.
no explanation at all. Uh, but Rachel Blanchard went on to be on a lot of things. So,
Yeah.
but anyway, and then like one of Gary's little brother Tucker showed up, and he was annoying. And then
Yeah.
eventually, I think in season 5 is when Stig shows up, who's like one of Tucker's friends, because it's like,
Yeah.
I guess we kind of need that at some point. Like, and that was meant to be like, all right, the next guard of people. But I feel like I remember at the time, Tucker and Stig, especially Sam, who was the new girl who came in, I had no problems with. But like Tucker and Stig, I thought were super annoying. And I was just like,
Yes.
I don't have any. And that's the point. That's the point.
Annoying little brother energy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because they're teenagers.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Why would, yeah. Oh, my little brother has to come. Yeah.
Right.
Um, yeah, I feel going back and watching some of these hold up really well, and some of them I don't even know if they held up at the time. But it is definitely
Yeah.
fun to kind of go back. And it's sort of when I was making my list, because we each made a list of top episodes, favorite episodes, which we will get into. And we'll do a round robin style. Can you do a round robin of 2 people? We'll find out. Um, but like some of the ones that really stand out are the ones that are like, or the ones that I put on my list as my favorite are the ones that I had the strongest memories of, I think, in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
Very few times did I go back and watch one that I didn't remember that well and went, oh yeah, that one's really good, or something like that. Like most of the time, if I didn't remember it, it's probably because I didn't care that much about it at the
Yeah.
time.
You didn't want to.
Yeah. Um, Even if it like they ended up having a character or a an actor that was recognizable, like you'd think I would have any memory of some of those, but I simply do not. So yeah, so let's do it. We're gonna go top five to one, and then we'll talk about some like other uh honorable mentions at a certain point. So Ty, give us your 5th favorite episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark?
So this one I'd probably say is Tale of the Quicksilver.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah, so that one's one that I actually remember. It came out in season 3. So I actually remember that one being on air. And a big reason why is a Kiki story. Of course, Kiki's one
Hmm.
of my favorites, but I remembered it because it starred Tatiana Ali doing double duty. And most people know Tatiana Ali from The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air because, of course, she was on that show, which was also actively airing at that time. And I was a huge fan of the show. So, like, when I saw her show up in, like, the very first, like, scene or whatever, I'm like, oh, my God, I know her. And it was just really cool to see her. I had never seen her do anything else before, so it was cool to see her in a, completely different role and all of that stuff. But that one is really good. Again, mostly people, people of color. You got these 2 brothers who moved into a house where some weird, creepy things happen before there's like a demon there. Tatiana Lee is playing twin sisters. The first twin sister realizes a couple of years before they move in that like the house is haunted. So it starts off like right off the bat, like she's doing this really weird like ritual trying to summon a demon and put it into an amulet. And I'm like, what kid, like watching it now, I'm like, what kid is like doing something like that? Like, I'm like, this is nuts. And she actually ended up dying. Like the demon caught the room on fire and she
Mhm.
dies as a result. We don't see the death, but we hear about it, again, later on or whatever, confirming that, the death happened and they don't like reverse it or do anything like that. Like she's a character that is dead and stays dead. But the boys move in. The older boy goes to school. He actually meets her twin sister, and they have like a little bit, like you said, there's some romance that kind of gets thrown into a lot of stories. So they do the cute, like meet cute. Oh, we dropped our paper and we bumped heads,
Sure.
and all of that stuff. And he starts having these visions and nightmares. Like his brother starts getting really sick for no reason. Their room is freezing. The beds are like shaking, like somebody's like literally taking and shaking the bed. Like it's so funny and ridiculous and stuff. But he sees her twin sister and sees the ritual and everything. He asks her about it. That's when the story comes out that, oh, my twin sister thought our house was haunted. Everybody thought she was crazy and she did something weird and like caught herself on, caught the room on fire, and people thought she had basically like killed herself. So they discover that the demon is indeed real. They do like a whole, ritual and stuff. And she gets a chance to kind of complete the mission that her sister started to like not only avenge her sister's death, but like to set her soul free or whatever. Like it's
Mhm.
pretty, I mean, again, some cheesy and, corny things kind of thrown in there, but it's actually like a pretty like deep and like emotionally like resonant episode because they, bid each other farewell and him and her start a relationship and all of that stuff like that. But I mean, at the time I was just like excited to see Tatiana Ali like on my screen or whatever. And like, I mean, you didn't really see a lot of girls that look like her, like doing weird rituals and,
Right.
believing in things like that and stuff. So that's definitely on my top 5 list. I went back and
I
watched it, and it's really good.
yeah, I remember really liking that one. I one thing that I think we can say almost across the board is that whatever the ghost or demon or whatever the thing is has really good makeup, even if it was pretty.
It looks good
Uh,
now.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And the whoever the performer is, who plays this weird demon, like they make him really look like gaunt and sunken in, but kind of like
Oh my gosh.
in a weird. It's hard to say. Like he's not like a skeletal person, but he just kind of has that like sunken eyes and stuff like that,
Yeah, he has this
and he
weird
wears a
tinge to his
cloak.
skin,
Yeah,
and, like, he's, like, reaching out, and they do a couple of shots where you can, like, see his, like, gnarled hand, like, reaching out and stuff,
yeah,
and I'm like, "That's classic, like, that's classic horror
yeah.
vibes right there or whatever of the scary hand reaching out to you and no way to escape and all of that." So, it's a good one.
Um, that talks a lot about a few things that they do a lot on the show, which is almost always there's a new kid in town or at school or whatever. There's always
Yeah,
a
yeah.
new kid to kind of like that's typical, like so that they can get on board with what new thing is happening. But it's also like this house has a past, and like there's a lot of haunted house stuff, even if it's not directly ghosts or whatever. There's always some sort of like
Yeah.
past trauma in places like that. It also is a really great way to just use the same set over and over again because they
And they
just
did.
they just find a house and like let's
Yes.
shoot in this house or whatever, this room set. Um, yeah, that's a great episode. Also, that was the first time I realized that silverware was not actually silver because that was a huge part of the end of the
Yes.
episode.
That was the whole reason that the ritual failed, is
Yeah,
because the silver spoon that was supposed to be used was in fact not silver. So
yeah,
he ended up having to take his necklace off and
right.
using the silver in his necklace and stuff instead. And instead, like so ridiculous.
Yeah,
Also, so terrible. I'm like, oh no, follow instructions to a T,
yeah. Know exactly what you're doing before you do
right
it.
before you try to summon a demon and trap it into an amulet.
Measure twice, cut once,
Right.
please.
Yeah, and then what was she gonna do with the
Hmm.
amulet? Like, after she summoned the demon and put it in there? Like, I mean, how do you go about safeguarding an item like that? There's no real answer to that question, it's just Ty
No,
wondering, like, in my brain, like, what
and this has been another episode of Ty Wondering.
Right, like
Yeah, I don't know. I never really thought about that as a kid. Like, what do they do after
yeah,
that? Like it, and then it's always like when there is a happy ending, it's always like, well, that was easy and everything's
right,
fine. But it's like everyone's okay with there having been an actual demon in this house or whatever.
right.
I find that stuff so funny. Great pick for number 5. I'm going to pick for my number 5. So there were a few episodes that are about scary clowns, and I actually don't think clowns are that scary
Mhm.
in general. Like, I think clowns are ugly and gross at times, but I'm not like inherently afraid of clowns. But the one of the 3 that works the best for me is The Tale of the Crimson Clown,
Yes.
which is the one that actually doesn't have a guy in makeup. It's a doll, and it's really so. This is about 2 brothers, one of whom is a real piece of shit,
Yes.
um, who is constantly like doing awful things and then blaming his much like nicer brother. It's like if Goofus and Gallant, if Goofus was like a delinquent, like an actual like problem child, and for some reason the good brother always like has to take the blame and stuff like that. And like the younger brother, I think we're meant to assume he's like a year or 2 younger,
Right.
steals money that they were going to buy their mom either a birthday gift or a Mother's Day gift with, and he buys a video game and then he blames it on the brother and like all this stuff, like,
Right.
and she just completely buys it. And as somebody, my little brother was not like that at all, but as somebody who was an older brother, like that really was like, oh
Right.
god,
Like,
like,
stop.
yeah. um but so the older brother tells this story to him. He's like, the Crimson Clown's going to get you if you act like this and all this stuff. And then stuff actually starts happening. Like, he completely just makes it up whole cloth. But to me, it like works really well as this kind of morality tale of like, you should not do things like this because your guilt will manifest as a
Right.
horrible giant headed clown. Um, I just think it works the best. And also the kid performances in it are really good, especially the
Yeah.
little piece of crap brother.
Yeah, that manifestation of fear, like
Yeah.
the things that you're trying to play a mind game with someone or something like
Yeah.
that, and your mind games are coming real. Your
Yeah.
worst fears, for certain people are coming real or whatever. Like that's something as a kid that really can get under your skin. And I
Oh,
think
yeah.
clowns are just inherently like strange for kids, especially that one. Oh my god, he had like that
Yeah.
round head and those like sharp eyebrows and all of that
And
stuff.
like, yeah, so he's got a big round head and a big red nose, but he's mostly white. And then he has like points on like a 2 on either side of his head, one on either side of his head pointing, and then like one straight up in the air of purple. And it's an interesting kind of color mixture. It's kind of an old timey style of clown costume, kind of more
Yeah,
Harlequin-esque. Um, and that's it. And the one time it's actually manifest as a person, it's a guy wearing a big kind of like, like Jack in the Box head of it.
right.
um it, and it just I think it really really works in terms of like what it's going for. And like you were saying, the reason I think a lot of clowns are scary or like they do scare people is that it's the fear of the uncanny stuff, which I find really interesting, where it's like
Hmm.
it looks like a person, but it's exaggerated. And also going from like smiley happy to smiley evil
Right.
there's just a very thin line.
Yeah.
Um, doesn't take that much, which is why the Joker works. Like, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the Joker is not effective, and like, because people kind of get why he's, like the
Right.
perversion of happiness and to debilitating evil, I think is really
Is
a
happiness,
fascinating.
like, bordering on, like, some sort of, like, delirium?
Mhm.
Like, where they could just completely lose contact with, like, reality, and you
Yeah.
don't know what'll happen from that point forward.
There's a
That's
reason they
what
call it maniacal laughter, because you're a
Yeah.
maniac.
Ugh, not a fan of clowns.
Yeah.
Not terrified of them, but they're unsettling.
Sure.
Unsettling to me.
But they're also silly. And that's the other
Yeah,
bit. It's like this you call people clowns when they're dumb, when they're being silly, like idiots.
right.
Um, and I think that's funny too, because like, are we afraid of clowns? Like, look at this clown. I'm terrified of him. Nobody ever says
Right.
that about a moron. Yeah, so that's my number 5, the Crimson Clown. What do you have for number 4? Ty Jehoshaphat Gooden. That's not your real name.
That is not my middle name. I have The Tale of the Midnight Madness.
So
So
Go
Is
ahead,
that on
please
your
go
list
ahead. But
too?
this is my number one actually in my heart. We'll talk about other ones,
Yeah.
but this is in my heart my number one.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites too. Like it definitely falls up there and it kind of fluctuates with some, with a couple of other ones or whatever, but it's one of my favorites. It was hard to pick a top 5.
It's tough,
So,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, and so I'm like my top 5, I mean, it's kind of in order, but not really because it kind of depends on the day where they could fluctuate
Sure.
around. But either way, that one is one of my favorites. It's definitely for like the theater like cinephile loving folks, among us. It's got Dr. Vink in it because a few of
Sure.
the characters on Are You Afraid of the Dark were people that would kind of like be recurring, but they may recur in different ways. And like you said before, there are some everybody has kind of their own storytelling style and they have their own like characters that they bring into it in a really specific way. So like with Dr. Vink, like he shows up in Frank's stories a whole lot. And Frank is kind of like
Mhm.
the punk rock, kid of the group or whatever. And so Dr. Vink is like this he's kind of like a mad scientist, sometimes like sorcerer, but
Yeah.
always kind of trickstery
Mhm.
kind of dude that basically somebody's in crisis. They need help. He shows up and he's kind of like, I can help you, but I need this in return. And it's never a good deal. Like, he's not the guy that you want to make a deal with people. Stop.
Mhm.
If a strange man shows up at your door and you're in crisis and he's like, I'll do this thing for you, but you also have to give me this thing, close the door. Like,
Yeah.
don't just whatever's going on, it just has to happen. Either way, so there's this theater, like this old, I guess, old time for that time period theater, whatever that's like struggling. They're not making any money. Nobody's coming in to see anything. They're on the brink of closing. So you have this one kid that works there named Pete. And Pete's like a super like theater head, like everyone else is ready to give up on the theater. They want to, move on and all of that stuff. And so Pete's like, no, I'm going to save the theater. So he goes on like this really brave campaign, which in the 90s, there's no campaigning on Facebook or, Instagram or anything because those things don't exist. So you take flyers like, an old school person would, and you like, he's putting flyers up. He's out like talking to people on the streets, like trying to get them to come to the theater. Nothing's working. Dr. Vink shows up. He's like, I'm going to, I used to be a filmmaker and I can help you, revive the theater if you let me show a movie in there. And it ends up being like Nosferatu, which is
Yeah.
actually a really great movie. People come, they see it. Dr. Vink's deal with the theater owner is that, if I make your theater a success again, you have to let me continue to show my films in here, which were probably going to be films that did weird things to people.
Mhm.
Theater gets successful again. The theater owner's like, get out of here. Like, we're good now. We've gotten to where we need to get. We're getting the big budget movies in. And then Dr. Vink is like, I'm going to get revenge on you. I'm going to make it so that way the characters in Nosferatu can come out and you're about to be murdered by vampires. And Pete's like, no, I'm going to do a reverse Uno on you. I'm going inside the film
Yeah.
itself and I'm going to kill the vampire.
Reverse
Like,
Uno.
yeah, like, I mean, he's like, I got something for you. I'm getting ready to go inside
Yeah.
and I'm getting ready to kill you or whatever. Like, it's something about it. Like again, like you were saying, like the makeup and the costuming and stuff is really great. I think it's actually super well acted. It's a
Yeah.
really just fun, like theater story. And that whole idea of like blurring the line between fantasy and reality with like TV and film and stuff or whatever. I mean, that's something that is a classic thing that as a kid, you're going to see it later on in horror when you're watching things like The Exorcist and, movies like that, where literally this screen is like a portal for evil. Like that's one of my favorite like themes in horror that pop up all the time. And so that was kind of one of the first times that I had really seen that before, of like the idea of like, oh, it would be creepy if this horror film could reach out and touch you, or if you could reach in and go into like this horrifying world that's being depicted on screen, that like the veil between reality and fantasy is thinner than what you think it is.
Yeah, I love. I mean, I like I said, this is in my heart, my number one, and
Mhm.
I think it is more so now. I obviously watched this one a million times when it was on, but also, like I am now a fan of. Like that idea. Here in LA, we have the Egyptian Theater, which used to be like that, on the verge of shutting down all the time,
Yeah.
and then the Dr. Vink in this case was Netflix who bought the theater and mandates that whenever they need to, you will have a week where we can just show our movies so that they can be in
Yeah, yeah.
Oscar contention. But the rest of the time you can show whatever you want. And so like I didn't at the time, like that idea of like a revival theater, like a smaller movie theater was not something I knew about. I went to AMC movie theaters at the mall. That's where I went and saw movies in Colorado.
Yeah.
Um, but now as a grown up, I go like, oh yeah, I love stuff like that. I love old movie houses. Also, Nosferatu is a great movie, but I do love the
Yes.
fact that even though Nosferatu is, and I guess it's because they had to like interact with it, but even though Nosferatu is in the public domain, they still reshot some of it for the
Indeed.
purposes of that. And it's all because obviously they had to, have it match the actor that they had. And
Right.
it's an interesting, like Christopher Heyerdahl is the guy's name who plays Nosferatu, and you've seen him in stuff. He's the tall, interesting looking guy who's in a, he was in Monarch. He was in the first episode of The Last of Us. Like he's been in lots and lots of stuff.
Oh.
Um, you remember the first episode of The Last of Us? It starts with that cold open of like a 60s talk show. You remember that?
Yes.
So the guy who's talking about the fungus is now I can't remember that actor's name. But a more well-known actor. But the guy who is saying like the other scientist was like, that's ridiculous. The
Right.
fungus, that's
That's
this
him?
guy, Christopher
Cool.
Heyerdahl. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
He was in a couple episodes of Are You Afraid of the Dark that I only knew now, but I always recognized him. I was just like, he has a
Yeah.
very distinct look, and he's super tall. He also played H.P. Lovecraft in a like kind of a weird TV movie that was on Canadian television that I've seen, because he kind of looks like he could be H.P. Lovecraft if you look
Yeah.
at an interesting look at him. So anyway, I love stuff like that, like especially now that I know. But like that version of Nosferatu, I was sort of like, he's got the kind of rat fangs, and it's like they do a
It's
really good
very
job, and
fun.
very
Yeah.
veiny also, like they put a lot of veins on him. It's cool. I really like that that makeup and the performance, and it's a really small, like it's Dr. Vink, the two kids
Mhm.
who work at this theater, the theater manager, and Nosferatu, and those are the only, and
Those are
then
the
there's like
only
extras watching the movie, but that's it.
Right.
Like that's the
Yeah,
only
those are
people in
the
the whole
main
movie.
characters.
But it feels bigger because they actually used an old movie house. They actually
Mhm.
shot it in a real location, which I think always helps, I think, a lot.
Yeah, because
So
sometimes
yeah,
you could tell when you're on a set. Like, I mean, it gives them
yeah.
that space to really be able to move around and play with that space. It's also
I don't,
kind of the theme of making the deal with the devil too.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I love cursed like
Yes.
cursed movie things. Like you shouldn't be watching this. Like that's a huge part of
Right.
my favorite kind of like scary stories. Also, is like the forbidden thing kind of.
Yeah, so this is
Um,
good prep for The Exorcist, good prep for, like,
yeah,
many later years movies like The Ring and stuff like that
sure,
again, where, something could come out of the screen. Something you might be able to go into the screen like that blurring between fantasy and reality
yeah,
is always fun to play with.
yeah.
Cursed things are always fun to play with. Don't watch this or you could die.
Um, I haven't like looked. I haven't done, which is weird because I do this for everything else, but like to see who the recurring writer of my favorite episodes are, and so I'm going to
Mhm.
shout these out. I'm going to go back and then I will shout these out as we go. So, Tale of the Midnight Madness is written by Chloe Brown, who ended up writing a ton of this show. I'm going to try to find
Nice.
all the other ones so that we can give them their proper due, because I think that
Yeah.
is
Can almost guarantee that a few of that writers are on our list or whatever, because sometimes you just get that similar vibe and
yeah.
dialogue and stuff.
Let's see. Quicksilver was Wendy Brotherlin, and Crimson Clown was Darren Cotania. So hooray. Good for those people. Okay. My number 4. This is so I have a couple on my higher up on my list, and maybe this is from being a grown up, but like
Mhm.
that are kind of more, I will say, adult, mature is the word I'm going to use. And I think this one is like legitimately a sad and heartfelt story, and I'm sort of surprised that I like it so much, because I remember
Yeah.
when I was a kid not liking it that much, because it's really sad. And that is The Tale of the Shiny Red Bicycle.
Yes, that was next on my list.
Okay. Sorry for taking your ones.
No, that's okay.
um
I figured we would have overlap. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm assuming. Yeah, let me see if I can find this. Okay, Tale of the Shiny Red Bicycle, written by Cassandra Schaffhausen.
Mhm.
It is about a teenager who's in high school, who is haunted by the ghost of his friend who died in a bicycle accident, and who just shows up everywhere. And it's sort of just like,
Yeah.
and key to the whole thing is that he was riding this brand new bicycle and he wanted to show it off, and he crashed and fell into this raging river, and then was swept away and drowned basically. And he's haunted by the visage of his friend, who obviously is still young because it
Mhm.
was years ago. Um, and this bicycle that was such a huge part of it, and it like pops up everywhere, and it's kind of getting in the way of his life, sort of thing. And it he the big thing about it is that he blames himself for his friend dying, because he wasn't brave enough or strong enough or whatever to save him, pull him out of the water.
Right.
And the whole thing is an allegory about um, guilt and grief, and how
Mhm.
like survivor's guilt, literally survivor's guilt, because he wasn't able to save his friend. And the ghost of his friend, like when they finally like have a confrontation, like he doesn't say, "You did this to me," or anything like that. He's like, "It's okay. I'm telling you to, this wasn't your fault. It's okay." And it's so touching. Like, I love that thing.
It's very touching.
And then because it needs to kind of have some kind of excitement moment, um, our main guy's little brother is about to suffer the same fate, and he's actually able to save him and
He's able
everything
to
like
save
that.
him. Yeah.
This is such a good story. Like,
Yeah,
and I
yeah, that
know it's one that
survivor's guilt. Yeah,
yeah.
it's wild how it touches on that, and I've seen it. I've seen this one. It's probably one of the few that I've seen like multiple times, kind of in different stages of my life.
Uh-huh.
So I remember seeing it, in proper when it first aired. I remember seeing it again in middle school through reruns and stuff, and it hit me different then because I had lost a friend.
Mhm.
And as a kid, I was still trying to really form like my concepts and my understanding around death and what it meant to like lose someone. And everyone I had known up until that point in my life had died and they were old. So, that was my concept of like when you die, you're an old person and that's what happens once you get to a certain age. But like having someone in middle school die, um, was tough and it hit me hard. And like when I remember seeing this episode or whatever, and it really touched me. And even watching it, I actually went back and rewatched it a couple of days ago,
Mhm.
knowing that we were going to do the podcast and stuff. And that like his face and that bike are like, those are two like
Oh, yeah.
images that are just like stuck in my, how some things just kind of like sear themselves into your brain. Like it's stuck into my brain, and going back and watching it then and having a whole new concept of
Mhm.
like, death and grief and stuff. Cause I went through some pretty major loss, over in the past couple of years or whatever. Like it resonates and it approaches those topics in a way that feels so like real, like it feels super authentic or whatever, but it's also approaching them in a way that makes it understandable and really like breaks it down for kids and talks about the way that, because the way that we approach it and the way we process through those things is different than the way that kids do. I mean, they blame themselves for things that are impossible, and all of that, and they really hold on to a lot of those feelings. So it does a really good job of like parsing through all of that. And also the friend is just really creepy. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, if I saw him outside my window, I'd be having a fit.
They do a really good job of making, they shoot him from far away. They light him specifically. He's got the really gaunt ghost makeup that they use. His
Yeah.
hair is really tousled and everything like that. And he just kind of is there in shots. And they do a really good job of making it seem scary, because it is. Like, guilt
Right.
and grief are so hard to take, especially when you're a young person.
Mhm.
That it does feel like, also, like, we're grown-ups, we've probably been to therapy, like it makes a lot more sense now. I can psychoanalyze this way better than I could as a kid.
Right, yeah.
I think I was more not annoyed, but like bored as a kid, because it's not jump out scary. It's just like,
Right.
it's the creeping
That creeping in
s-
the shadows.
yeah. And
Yeah.
it's the specter of this event that happened and everything like that. um but I think they do such a good job of just making it like, yeah, this guy, Mike, cannot live his life anymore doing what he's doing, being so affected by this moment and blaming himself to where it's getting in the way of him spending time with his own brother, and like just stuff like
Right.
that. Like, his parents are really like upset, just that, well, obviously it's sad, and this is the anniversary, and like all that stuff that happens when you have a moment of grief like that. I
Right.
just think it's like, it's amazing to me that this was the 10th episode of the second season, and it is so like affecting to me.
Yeah.
You know,
That's those 2nd
30
and
years
3rd
later.
seasons had some good stuff in there.
I think
Like,
overall those are my favorite, like
yeah.
pound for pound, my favorite 2 seasons. Like there were,
Yep.
I think, episodes that are going to be higher on both of our lists later, maybe. But in terms of like week by week, that's kind of like the heyday for me watching the show too. So I have a lot of that like coloring my memories. But yeah, Shiny
Yeah.
Red Bicycle. So we both love that one. So that's great. Good for us. What is next on your list, or just any? I guess at this point we're just talking about episodes. But what's next on the list you made?
Sure. So I've got Tale of the Captured Souls.
Ooh,
And that one is really good. That's actually from season 1. A little bit later in the season, but it's basically this family moves into this house. There's this young guy there, and they start kind of changing their appearance. Things look different. She meets him and he's kind of dressed old timey. She wants to take photos of him. He's like, no, 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 don't take photos of me. But it was the whole concept of the idea that, like back in the day, there was kind of this, superstition that if you took photos, they would like drain your life force. And that's essentially what happens or whatever, because photos have been taken of the family in there and everything. The young girl is trying to figure out how to not have her family's life force drained. Like it's fun, it's weird, it's creepy. I definitely like the first few episodes of season 1, but, like, that's probably the first one where I was like, "Oh, like, I'm really into this show." Like, I
yeah,
mean, you know how you kinda, like, hit your stride with something or whatever? Like, again, he's same thing, similar with the makeup where he's kinda got this washed out look, he's got this tousled hair, he's dressed a little different, but there's just something about that character that's incredibly, incredibly unsettling. And again, like, I was always looking for, I wanna see these stories and have, like, people of color in there and all of that stuff like that. And this is a Black family that, that this is happening to. And I love that the main character, like, she's immediately trying to, take action and, and figure things out and stuff like that. So it's really good. And it's another Kiki story.
yeah. I was gonna say that's a Kiki one, written by
Hmm.
Ann Appleton. So we've had like a very wide swath of writers so far. We haven't
Yeah.
had a repeated writer, but so that's great.
Yeah.
I remember this was one that like when I saw the title, I was like, "What one is this?" But then the mirrors are the one. It's like, okay, you're trapping people in mirrors. You're
Right.
sucking their youth out. I think that's fun.
Right.
And yeah, like
Yeah,
I
because
like that one too.
everything mirrors, cameras, like all of those things were kind of like sucking the life force out of
Yeah,
people. So that one is really, really fun. Like, I
yeah.
wouldn't necessarily say it's one of the best, but it's one that I enjoy the
Hmm.
most. So that's why it's in my top 5.
I like it. I think that's good. Okay, here's a sort of a later one that I, for whatever reason, really like. The Tale of the Unexpected Visitor. Do you remember this one?
I'm not sure. That one's not ringing with me.
Um, when I looked it up, it was in, I think it's a season 5 episode, which actually has a couple bangers.
They do. They went out on a bang. I've got a season 5 one on my
Uh,
list.
this was a Kiki story. Um, it's about two teenage boys who accidentally contact aliens. Uh,
Yes, I do. I do know this one. It gives very X-Files like
yes, and I
vibes.
think that's why I
Yes.
like it so much. Yeah, this was early '96 when this aired in the U.S. and it was just fun. Like I remember just really liking the camaraderie between the two boys. Like one is more nerdy and kind of shy, and then the other one is like a weird kind of rocker goofball, and they're for whatever reason buddies. And then they contact these aliens through the nerdy kid's dad has like this actually huge like radio telescope thing. It's, I'm like
Why?
surprised at this guy at the level of whatever. And then they contact aliens and talk to aliens and stuff. And like there's really scary moments of like the alien um appearance and everything like that. And it's but it ultimately isn't a scary one. It's more fun, and
Mhm.
I really enjoyed, like you said, the X Files. By this point, '96, like the X Files was a huge thing, and they did alien stuff. I would say fairly infrequently on Are You Afraid of the Dark,
Yeah,
but when they did it, it was sort of like, ooh, this is fun. But there are a few other ones that are, and maybe this one's on your list, but like the Tale of the 13th Floor was another one where there was like aliens involved and stuff.
that one's good.
Um, which I liked, and that was another one that had Christopher Haredoll in it. But this one, for whatever reason, it just worked for me because that's I think the most relatable is like you and your buddy trying to find out if aliens exist. I just feel
Yes.
like that is so relatable, especially for me at the time, an 11-year-old. So
Yes, it's such a ridiculous thing. Like, kids are always up to some kind of, like, and I don't know that kids do it as much anymore. I have kids or whatever, but they don't spend as much time kind of up to their own devices. And those are
mhm,
just like silly things that you do when your parents aren't around and school's out or it's summertime or something like that. Like, you are trying to figure out if Candyman is actually real. You're
right.
you're doing light as a feather, stiff as a board. You're messing around with the Ouija board. You're trying to contact aliens or figure out if they're real. Like, it's just on a list of things of like weird, ridiculous things that kids try to do to no
Mhm.
avail. But it's like, what happens if it if it actually worked? Like, it explores like my greatest dream, which is to
Yeah,
talk to aliens.
I love it. And I forgot to mention this one was written by Alan Kingsburg, who was I think somebody who came on in later seasons, but I don't quote
Mhm.
me on that. Cool. Your next one. Number 2, I think we're up to. It doesn't matter at this point. We're just talking about episodes we like.
Maybe. So the next one that I have on my list is actually also season 5. So like I
Great.
said, they kind of went out with a little
They
bit of a
did do
bang.
it. Yeah.
It's The Tale of Station 109.1.
Ooh, okay. So we got a Gosling. This is a Gosling.
That is a Gosling one. This is one from Stig, and it makes a lot of sense because, again, I said Stig is kind of like the weird, smelly outcast among outcasts, and this episode revolves around brothers. Again, that sibling thing like kind of comes up
Yeah.
as a recurring thing. There's always two kids, and one's into something, and the other one's like, stop doing that, or they don't believe them, or they're being affected in some kind of way. But in this one, the younger brother is like he's weirdly in like he is like obsessed with death, like to the point that he's like sleeping with like flowers in his room.
Yeah,
He's
it's
like wearing black all the
creepy.
time. It's very, very, very creepy. Like he's on some creepy stuff. And his brother's like, his whole family's like, okay, dude, whatever." Brother decides to scare him. He works as a mechanic. He like puts him in the back of a hearse and then he rigs it up for like the radio to come on and a bunch of like other like creepy things to happen, the lights to flicker and everything. He's trying to scare him and he does scare him, but then the radio is like switches over to a station and Gilbert Gottfried is the DJ on the station. He's hilarious. Every time he's on screen, like of course, him just playing a comedic role, like how can you not love him in something like this?
Yeah.
He's born to be on a show like as unserious as Are You Afraid of the Dark? So he's the DJ, and it's like he's putting out like this signal for like people who are, I guess they're like recently deceased and like trying to find their way home, like their soul is trying to find their way home. So he ends up in this he follows the signal and he ends up in kind of this like afterlife waiting place that's
Mhm.
kind of like it is in Beetlejuice, but less on the weird side and more just kind of on like the scary and unsettling side. Like there are
Yeah.
people who clearly don't want to be there. One guy, I think he goes to hell. Like, I mean, they don't expressly
Yeah.
say that, but like they drag him away, and it's
Yeah.
it's very much so like someone going to hell. But people are like, I don't want to be here. And then the kid that's obsessed with death is suddenly like, hey, I ain't obsessed. I'm not that obsessed anymore. Like, I would like to go back. And it's like too late. We put a number on you. When your number's called, you're fitting to go to wherever people that die go next or whatever.
Yeah.
So they go through this whole battle of trying to get him out of that. It turns out he had gotten mistaken with someone else that was recently deceased and was supposed to have their number called so they can get their ticket punched, proverbially or whatever. And so then he decides, you know what? Maybe I don't want to be obsessed with death anymore. Maybe I just want to go outside and play. Maybe I shouldn't be into morbid things. That kid was on a dark path though, because he put a bug in a jar and he like put the lid on. He was trying to see how long it was gonna take for the bug to die. And I'm like, you start off like doing torturous things to animals. Like, I feel like, we definitely saved that universe from a future like psycho killer.
Yeah.
He was on the path towards some dark stuff.
And it's I love how kind of over the top they go with how obsessed with death he is. Like you mentioned, he has like funeral, like his room is adorned with funeral flowers.
Funeral
He
flowers.
sleeps in a full suit, like he's in a
Like
coffin.
he's in a coffin.
I
Yeah.
think he even I'm trying to remember, like he has a weird like bed in a box that even is like
Yes. Yeah, and he has, like, weird smelling things in his room, like
right.
old clothes and things like that because he wants it to smell like decay and like death and like just like, I
Yeah.
mean, it's not normal obsession with death. Like that kid was going down a dark path.
No.
We had to save him.
And
He
yeah,
was
you're
doing
right.
too
Gilbert
much.
Gottfried is so good in this. Like he's just sort of like there was a few times where they got kind of Bobcat Goldthwait was in an episode, and there were a few times where they got like the big guest star, but it was like a weird character guest star.
Right.
Um, I'm trying to remember some of the other ones. Charles S. Dutton was in. He wasn't the weird, but he was like a
Yeah.
ghost of a
He
pirate
was like the
captain.
ghost pirate, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, "Do you
Um,
kill this person?" And it's like, "Well, he's already dead." So
yeah.
I can't remember the name of the episode, but I do remember
Yeah,
that where there was
I'll
like
look it
this
up,
big
but
dilemma, and literally like his bones, like his skeleton is over it, like in the corner, and he's like, "Do I kill him or not?" And I'm like, "Well, I mean, if we're talking about like a moral decision here, like he's already dead, so
yeah.
I think you'll be okay."
Yeah, it's but anyway, yeah, like Gottfried is just completely dialed in, and I also love the kind of weird thing about like station 109.1. I think it's like that's not supposed to be a real station because that's
Mhm.
like above where the FM dial is supposed to be able to go.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's that aspect of it too. It's like forbidden, like outside the realms of um the regular world. There's a few episodes like that, and we'll mention those in the honorable mention maybe. But like, yeah, that episode's great, and I remember really liking it. And Ryan Gosling has a very small role as the normal older brother. He's not in it that much, but if you want to see Ryan Gosling at the age of however old he was, that's your thing. There you go. Okay, so for my one, okay, it's called the Tale of Cutter's Treasure is the one that you were thinking of with Charles S.
Got it.
Dutton,
Yeah.
and that was the one and only two-parter that they ever did. It was jointly told by Gary and Frank, which means that it had both Sardo and Dr. Fink in it.
Mhm.
That was the big.
That was a
We're
fun one.
we're a big show now, and so we can do stuff like this. Okay, so my number two, I guess, or whatever, who cares? I'm gonna say is the Tale of the Dream Girl. This is another interesting kind of ghosty one. I guess if you don't want to be spoiled, because the whole kind of thing about this one is a twist. So if you don't, for whatever reason, don't want to watch or don't want us to talk about this thing that's been around for 30 years, you can go watch season 3, episode 10. It's
Mhm.
on Paramount Plus or whatever. Written by David Preston. Okay, so the thing about this one, here we go. I'm going to start talking about it. Is there's this teen named Johnny who works at a bowling alley. He's a janitor. He's very lost. He doesn't feel like he belongs anywhere. People don't really. He doesn't feel like he can talk to girls and all this stuff. The only person in his life who actually is his friend is his little sister. And then he starts to see this beautiful girl in a like a Letterman's jacket appear
Mhm.
in his dreams and also outside of his dreams and all this stuff. And eventually you find out that she died in a car crash several years ago. Their car got like run over by a train when they were stuck on the tracks.
Yeah.
Um, and then so she's a ghost, and then eventually you find out that Johnny is also a ghost.
That
And
was something I did not see coming.
yeah. And
Like,
it's and the sister is the only one who can see him, and that's why
yeah,
like if you go back and watch it again, like so many times he tries to talk to people and they seem like they're just being rude or whatever, and they actually
it's
can't.
very Sixth Sense.
It's the
Like,
Sixth Sense.
yeah, it's very Sixth Sense.
It's the Sixth Sense 5 years before the Sixth Sense came out.
Yeah.
Um, somebody being dead all the time is not necessarily a brand new thing, but I remember being like, so what's the deal? It's just this girl's a ghost, but then it's like at the end, oh, he's a
Right, it's like,
ghost.
"Oh, crap,
Like,
he's a ghost too."
and it's based on the song Teen Angel,
Oh my
which if you
gosh.
didn't know that,
Right.
the name of the character is Johnny Angeli or Angeli. It's all right there. It's exactly the thing. Kind of based on old 50s songs too. Like
Mhm.
he's sort of looks like a greaser, like drives a, or when he drove a like a old 57 Chevy and stuff like that. And like it has a very like 1950s era vibe to the whole thing, and I think that actually
Yeah.
like plays to its benefit. And they, for whatever reason, this one was directed by a guy named David Winning, who directed quite a few episodes, but he's able to make it feel really uncanny just all the time. Like it
Right.
feels weird
Something
and
feels
off.
off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's because this guy's actually a ghost and like he can't interact with the world and stuff like that. And yeah, this
Right,
like,
it's like, "Dude, is everybody a jerk or what's what's
yeah,
going on?" You literally can't see him.
yeah. So conceptually, I think it works great. I think the performances are really good. And I remember thinking that I don't know her name, but the actress who played Donna, the ghost girl, when I was 10, I thought was very, very pretty.
Of course.
So
Yeah,
that's
that's a
my
good
number,
one.
whatever. Yeah.
That's a good one. I think I've lost numbers at this point. We've had overlap and everything
Yeah,
like
it's
that. But I
fine. All
also,
good.
yeah, and I think it's probably the like goosebumps person in me, and also just like how I think certain objects can be like a cursed object once again or whatever. I love things like that. But it's a tale of the tale of the curious camera.
Yes, great
Is
one.
another
Great
one
one.
that I
Yep.
really, really like. Like, that one is awesome. Basically, this boy's getting bullied. He ends up with this camera. Like, the camera actually depicts things that are going to happen in the future or whatever. So he starts using it like it's a little dark because he starts using the camera to his advantage to like strike back at the bullies and all of that stuff like that. And it's all good and well until the next thing you know, bad things are about to happen to people that he loves and he cares about. So again, it's like that whole theme of like, maybe don't exact revenge on your bullies. Think of a better way because, the karma, the what we put out into the world, that karma comes back to us is kind of like the big like moral thing. And that was a Betty Ann one. And hers were always definitely like, and I mean, it's also like, the camera's cursed, and then the curse jumps over from the camera, and then it ends up at the end of the episode, ends up in the, computer. So again, it's like these devices, technology, and all this stuff like that, and especially with computers back then, like, this whole idea of like a distrust of new technology and how it can, leak
Hmm.
into your brain and cause bad things and all of that stuff. So that one is fun.
I really like that one. That one was written by Susan Kim, another
Mhm.
writer we haven't talked about yet. Was actually the episode right before the Tale of the Dream Girl. Like that was the one that aired the
Yeah.
week before. And the one right after Tale of the Dream Girl was the Quicksilver, and the one after that
Yeah.
was the Tale of the Crimson Clown. That
They had
season,
that
season
season
3
was
is
hitting.
good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's got to be my favorite season. Like,
yeah, it's
man, they
rad.
they were firing on all cylinders. They're good stuff. And like I said, you go back and watch it now, and it's like, yeah, legit impressed. Which I haven't gone back and watched this one in a while, but the couple that I did get a chance to like take a peek back at or whatever, I was like, impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um. So, are we going to talk about this one? I think it's the one that everybody thinks is the scariest, and I think that
Mhm.
the makeup effects in it are tremendous. I think it has a great last 5 minutes, but I don't necessarily know that it is um especially effective overall. But anyway, it's the first episode of season 5, the first episode told by Stig, written
Mhm.
by Will Dixon. It is the tale of the dead man's float. And
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
everybody says that this one has the scariest creature in it, which is this tall, weirdly like sort of like swamp thingy looking ghost creature, which is haunting a pool, but you only can
Yes.
it's invisible until you put this specific chemical in the pool.
Right.
And it makes him look bright red or pink or whatever. And I think that was how they could make it like gory, quote unquote, without it actually being gory.
Right.
Um, and it is a really cool image, and I like the idea. But I feel like they did this a bunch, where like the school's pool or something like that was haunted. So like
Yeah.
by that point, I wasn't like 100% on board with it. But
Yeah, for that
um,
one, it just doesn't. I mean, it's fine. I don't think it's a
it's
terrible
fine.
episode or
Yeah,
anything like that, but I don't find it to be as scary. I literally think that people just put it there because of the actual monster
yeah,
itself and like the effects and stuff. That's great, but the story itself is to me is lacking. Like, it
yeah,
felt like something they had already, like you said, it felt like Will trod like ground. Like they had already done so many things like similar to that. There was nothing really where they have so many more stories that are so much more like, inventive and play around with like a lot of typical like horror tropes and stuff like that. Like, it was just very basic.
it's very basic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is not to say if that scared you when you were a kid or whatever, like
Right.
I am on board with you being scared by this. Like it is a
Oh
scary
no, yeah, you
looking
should have been
monster.
scared by it. It's a scary looking monster.
But the whole story, like it's a geek who doesn't know how to swim, and so he asks his crush, who is like a member of the swimming team, to teach him after hours, and then
Of
there's a
course.
ghost stuff going on, and
Yeah,
he uses smarts to outwit it, and that means that he wins the girl in the end. And it's just so basic.
of
And of
course.
course, when you think about it, these are kids telling stories, like, and Stig being the outsider, it makes perfect sense that he would tell a
Exactly.
story like this, but
Right. Yeah,
whatever.
he
I think
almost always, and usually his stories were pretty good, with outsider stuff or whatever. But yeah, he almost always was going to aim at like the weird outsider who ends up being, triumphant in the
yeah.
end. Yeah.
Yeah. So one There was another one called the Tale of the Water Demons, which I think does that same idea better, which is that this old sea
Mhm.
captain kind of guy it lives in fear of zombies, and so or being attacked by zombies while he's asleep. And so he doesn't sleep. He's just this old guy who just has been awake for however long. It's a silly idea, but I think like in terms of like nautical whatever ghosts, I think it actually like is a better told story. But I'm gonna say for one that I actually think is great is
Mhm.
toward the end of season 5, actually, The Tale of the Night Shift, which is about this
Yes.
kid who is in a hospital, and there is a volunteer named Amanda who he, of course, has a crush on. And it turns out that there is a vampire in the hospital who has been feeding on people
Yes.
at night, both staff and patients.
I love this.
It's such a good story.
It's
Like
so fun.
they only did a few vampire, well, not a few, but they did some decent vampire ones. But this one I think is my favorite one.
That's the
Like,
best one. Yeah.
um, I love the hospitals are creepy. They did a great job there.
Mhm.
Um, and I love the idea of this vampire kind of just like using um people who are already sick or working the night shift and when lacking sleep and just feeding on them. I think it's such a cool
Right.
idea.
Yeah, I love anything that's set in a hospital. Any
Yeah.
scene, darkness and stuff like that. Like, I mean, you get that with like Halloween too, where like,
Hmm.
you get a lot of Laurie being chased around in the hospital by this, by the shape, this entity or whatever. Of course, it's vampires. Like you really can't go wrong with vampire stories. Like they are just like it's like a top tier
Except for
monster.
Vampire in Brooklyn, which I think you have to agree is a bad movie.
It's so bad that I enjoy it.
Fair. That's fair.
Yeah. Like, I know it's not a good movie, but it's so bad that I it's so bad that when I see it on TV, I don't go out and seek it, but
Sure.
if I
Oh,
see it on
sure.
TV, I absolutely will watch it.
Yeah. Eddie Murphy as a vampire prince is so
Was
strange.
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
I couldn't buy it from him. Like I don't know.
No.
And he's not typecast as anything or whatever, but it's just weird.
Yeah.
I think with different casting, maybe.
One of Wes Craven's weirdest movies, and by that I mean like most atypical. Like what?
Mhm.
Why would you? I mean, I get why you would want Wes Craven to direct it, but it's just like
Right.
doesn't make sense. Anyway, love that one. What was I also going to say? Oh, Chloe Brown wrote that one, which we've mentioned her before, and I don't remember on
Yeah.
what. Do you have
I
any
wonder
other
what
ones you want to mention? Please.
I want to know what Chloe Brown is up to now. Like I'm very curious.
Let's see. Does she have a Wikipedia page? It doesn't seem like it. I will look that up if you tell me
Yeah.
another one episode you like. We'll wrap up shortly, but
Yeah, yeah. Hmm. Trying to think. It was a couple. Like I said, I like Tale of the Doll Maker. That was really good because Creepy Dolls, that was another Betty Ann story or whatever.
mhm.
And somebody thinking that like a dollhouse like was the reason why their friend like disappeared and all of that stuff. But Creepy Dolls are like that got me as a kid because I
Mhm.
definitely had like a thing against like dolls. Like I was terrified of like Chucky and all those things like that. Like the idea of like a doll coming to life or dollhouses coming to life. Cause again, it's kind of like that line with clowns or whatever. Like with dolls, like most of the time I was playing with them and saw them as like, friendly and I could create my own world. But it's kind of like this idea of like, what if they could create their own world? And what if that's the world that I don't want to be able to, that I don't want to exist in, or what if it's like an evil world or something like that? Like the idea of something inanimate coming to life and capturing you is not great. That one's fun though. Like I said, that's another season 5 one. Season 5 was not a bad end.
No, I think
Yeah, but I
that
guess
was
at that point they had kind of exhausted, their possibilities. And a 5 season run is like that's a respectable run. Like, what else are we gonna do?
so like a twist out of a story from the
Mhm.
Midnight Society. Chloe Brown is not a real person. Chloe Brown is a pseudonym for DJ McHale, the show's creator.
Wow, I love it. Yeah,
Incredible. I would never have
there's a
guessed that.
yes, there's a story in there
Yeah, there has to be
that could
one
be
that I
told
will
around
not
the camp. That
tell.
could be told around the campfire.
Yeah. I'm going to do a quick read off of some of the other ones I really like.
Mhm.
Okay, so we mentioned like, Betty Ann's are always sort of cursed object related.
Yeah.
There was also oh shoot, now I lost it. Yeah, the Dollmaker's a good one. I remember really liking
Mhm.
the Dollmaker. I also that was one of the episodes that um I was like, why are they talking like that? And that's when I realized that Canadian people have a different accent than
Yeah.
um um this was the first Sardo episode. This wasn't a Betty Ann, this was a Gary, but it was the Tale of the Super Specs. That's another one that
Mhm.
has a cursed object. Um One of my favorites is actually from season 1. For whatever reason I really like it. Maybe it's just my Irish heritage, but The Tale of
Mhm.
Jake and the Leprechaun. I loved, and it's about a kid who's in a play with this weird old guy who's
Mhm.
actually a banshee who is trying to get the kid to like give himself over and become a changeling and all this stuff. And he uses, and then an actual leprechaun has to come and save him. Like he was living his life just like running a shop, but he's actually a leprechaun.
Yeah.
Um, I really liked that one for some reason. It's not the most like exciting episode ever, but
Yeah, I was gonna say I have a vague knowledge of that. Like I now that you've explained it, like I'm like, okay, I remember something like that existing, but I have to go back and rewatch that. Like that's the cool thing now with things
yeah.
being on streaming and everything to be able to go back and revisit and stuff. And I mean, sometimes you kind of like it's always a risk, like when you do
Oh
that.
yeah.
When you've watched something from your childhood, it's like, do I want to taint this this lovely memory that I have of this thing? But I'm gonna go back and watch that one now.
I also really, really liked The Tale of the Pinball Wizard, where a kid is
Yes,
stuck in a mall that it becomes a huge giant pin. It should be a video game, but it's a pinball game.
it
Um,
operates more like a video game for
yeah,
sure. Yeah.
but he has to save this girl, and like it's a video game logic with like dragons and knights and like
Hmm.
weird guys, but it's in a mall. I remember just loving that. Like,
Yeah, fighting all these smaller bosses
yeah.
to get to bigger and bigger bosses. A lot of really weird characters in there too, like the guys in the suits
Oh yeah, the guy,
who
the
were
like
like
the
expressionless. Yeah, like they
yeah,
were just like really they were weird looking things.
yeah. They were weird looking things. Um, and then the other one is The Tale of the Phone Police, which is another one of those where it's like it's things that kids shouldn't be doing, and let's have a scary version of it, which is if you make prank calls
Yes.
enough times, you will fall under the investigation of the phone police, and they will come and they have ultimate authority to take you and put you in a
Right.
dark room. And there's this kid who um has always been like he's the cautionary tale, but he actually is stolen and calls the kid and goes, "You have to help me," and like all this stuff. And
Right.
it's such an easy kind of story. It's literally just don't make prank calls.
Right.
And
It's
yet,
such a thing of its time
yeah,
too. Like, I mean, you know, that's something that just wouldn't really go over the same now because I mean, kids don't do prank calls anymore. You can't do prank calls anymore like that
no,
because
because of
yeah,
whatchamacallit,
caller ID is
caller
gonna
ID.
it's gonna rat you out every time.
Yeah, they're gonna get
Yeah.
you.
And now people won't answer like if you see it and
No,
it's unknown, like nobody's gonna answer an unknown phone call at this
no,
point.
never, not once.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, we could literally just like list other episodes we like, but I think that gives a good um overview of what we like about the show and just like remembrances of days gone by. It's a weird way to say that. Neither of us put on our list the episode that was like a big thing at the time, which is
Mhm.
um the tale of the, oh shoot, I can't remember what it was. It was the one that had Melissa Joan Hart in it, but it was about like a cold ghost, the
Yeah,
frozen
yeah.
ghost.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think that's scary in the least, but it was yeah, the
No.
tale of the frozen ghost.
I think it was just more that Melissa Joan Hart is
Yeah.
in this episode. So we're going to in our minds we're making it good because we love Clarissa.
Yeah. But just the little little frozen kid going, "I'm cold." It's not scary. Dumb, in
It's just
fact.
weird. Yeah.
Yeah.
And not good weird.
No.
Stupid weird.
Uh, Another vampire one I liked was, I mean, we need to stop. But the tale of the nightly neighbors, which is that
Yeah, yeah.
these kids think that their new neighbors, this family, this from Ukraine, Eastern Europe,
Of
are
course.
vampires, and it turns out the parents aren't vampires, but the kid
The
is,
kids
and they are
is,
the
yeah.
familiar for this vampire. I loved that ending.
It's great.
Um,
But yes, of course, the people from, from the
Eastern Europe.
European people would
Yeah.
be vampires.
I almost like it's almost too obvious where you're like, I think they're vampires, and then they are.
Right.
Or whatever. There's something vampire related. And then there's the other one, The Tale of the Full Moon, where a kid thinks that his mom's new boyfriend is a
A
werewolf,
werewolf, yeah.
and it actually is the new boyfriend's twin brother. And then they all live together in a little rowboat. No, but they
That is fun.
yeah.
So dumb.
Yeah.
Good
It's
dumb.
it's very funny.
Yeah.
Ty, thank you so much for coming on to talk about this old show that we both clearly still remember very well and very fondly.
Yes, thank you. I'm so excited. Like we've checked off some fun things on the list. We got Animorphs, we got this going on.
That's right.
Yeah.
What other
Are you
Nickelodeon stuff? Basically, it's going to be a thing like whenever Ty's on, we talk about weird old Nickelodeon things. Like, I don't know if that's
right?
going to be the case forever. Ty, we have a lot of Nerdoween stuff going on Nerdist.com. Do you want to give the folks a little rundown of what we have coming up in the month and what's already out there for people to read and or listen to?
Yeah. So we've got a Nerdoween playlist. It is the playlist to rule them all, and it's got a bunch of really fun.
And you're not just saying that because you and I came up with all the songs.
No, it's got some fun new entries or whatever that you necessarily wouldn't think about when you're thinking about a Halloween playlist. We want to try to do something a little different and mix it
Yeah.
up. So it's got some familiar faves, but then also some things that you may not necessarily think about when you're thinking about putting together a playlist. So
But it gives you the mood of
yeah,
spookiness.
it all sets the mood and it actually flows together really well. So thank you, Kyle, for your song organization. Like you got everything together really well. So we've got that going, and you can have that going on while you're checking out some of our new posts we have. I actually did a history post because I love doing those about the history of TV and how it plays into horror films. I kind of
Love
went
it.
back to Night of the Living Dead and just talked about a little bit about TV's history and society in general, and just how it continues to play like a big role in horror films specifically. We've got a horror anthology list that was put together by one of our freelancers that's really great. It's got indigenous horror, it has some folk horror, it has a lot of really good options. So if you're looking for something scary to read instead of necessarily watching or listening to, you can also get into that. But we've got some fun things, some horror things that will be related to DC and Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
Give you some things to check out there. We've got some things coming up to celebrate some anniversaries, like New Nightmare has a big anniversary coming up this year, so we're gonna celebrate that in a few ways. So I'm really excited. Last year we had a really popular post about horror villains and their zodiac signs that caused
Right.
much controversy online. So we're bringing that back in a different way, and we're going to examine another very common horror archetype and talk about what their zodiac signs are. So you have to stay tuned for that when it comes out. But it's a lot of really fun, interesting things. I think there's something there for everyone.
I think so. There's
Yeah.
scary stuff, and then there's also spooky stuff, and there's readers, and there's visual learners. Weird way to say that. And yeah, there's lots of fun stuff. Nerdoween is our absolute favorite time of year.
Indeed.
October becomes and I think it's all just because we're weird, creepy kids who grew up watching stuff like Are You Afraid of the Dark? So
yeah.
So please join us over on Nerdist.com. You can follow Ty on the various social media platforms at writer Ty Gooden, right? Did I get it right?
Yep. Writer Ty
Hell
Gooden
yeah.
on Instagram. Yep.
On Instagram. You can follow me on Instagram at functional_nerd. You can follow me on Letterboxd at Kyle_Anderson. I always do a Nerdoween or spooky season kind of marathon. Basically, I watch more than I ever watch throughout I watch a ton anyway, but like
love it.
October, I always like kick it up several notches.
Yeah.
So if you want to follow along with what I'm watching there, you can go to Letterboxd. And please keep listening to Laser Focus the rest of the month. We're going to have some guests, some returning favorites, some brand new guests to talk about various other spooky things. Really excited for that. And if you want to get in touch, you can email us at laserfocus@nerdist.com. All right. Thank you again, Ty.
Thank you, Kyle. This is fun.
Absolutely. I'm Kyle Anderson. Join me again next time on Laser Focus when my guest will be a different person. Bye-bye. Laser Focus is a production of Nerdist Industries and Legendary Digital Networks. It was produced, edited, and hosted by me, Kyle Anderson. For more, visit nerdist.com.